once you know that that is your way in. And once you know how not to let that get in the way. And that's what therapy does. It helps you identify the places where you take things personally to an extent that you should not, because it's getting in the way of your work, right? I've been going in finally doing really great on camera work because I've gotten out of my way. I've gotten out of my way of I'm supposed to look this way, I'm supposed to look that way. And the feedback that I get is, that's not how we were going, but you were amazing. So that means next time Jerry Bruckheimer needs somebody to audition, and this is the third time I've auditioned for him, actually, he remembers me. He was like, that's not at all who I thought she was. That was amazing. But you're 3 inches taller than our leading man, so, but that's okay. Now I don't have to fight to get into an audition for Jerry Bruckheimer, right? Even when he gives me French and Creole 2 days ahead of time and says, learn that in the scene. Okay, player, that's fucked up, but all right. But that's my way in, right? Having a therapist say to me, let's talk about this thing of you assume you're not going to be wanted or loved, because that's getting in the way of you walking into that room and doing something beautiful about the human condition, which is why you became an actor. You didn't become an actor to get the part. You didn't become an actor to get an Oscar. You became an actor because you want to unveil that human condition, let somebody be vulnerable, the thing that you feel like you don't get a chance to do in real life. So let's help you learn how to do it better artistically, but let's help you learn how to do it in real life to make your life richer and to give you some perspective when you get rejected in the business that you're in, which is what it feels like day after 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 day. That you've spent all this money, all this time, you walk into a room, you pour your soul into it. I call it leaving blood on the floor. An actor taught me that, a brilliant actor, Billy Eugene Jones. He was like, there is actually no point in you coming out here tonight, and we were doing Raising the Sun, unless you were leaving blood on the floor. And he walked out of a rehearsal. And there was another actor in the room who wasn't, and he was right. And then when we came back to do it for the designers, we couldn't get up off the floor. Blood on the floor. When you do that, it feels like it's not about you crying, it's about you opening. What happens is when you hear your audience go, you've done your job. Because our job is not about us feeling. It's about the audience getting a chance to be like, I'm frail and fucked up like that, but it's okay. I can get something at the end. I will get to the rainbow if I just have enough courage to let myself feel that. So we don't do in real life. That's why being an actor is so hard, like opening that way, because we don't do it in real life. A really good therapist will teach you the reason you became an actor is because you don't do that at all in your real life. And that needs to stop because that's not healthy. And a really good therapist, instead of going, what happened to you when you were 6? That was terrible. And then what happened? Okay, that's fine. But we go over what happened at 6. What we really need to do is figure out what were the coping mechanisms that we came up with then so that we don't feel anything, and teach our body that it's okay to feel that now. The other thing that a therapist will do, besides giving you emotional courage, is the way that you talk about the way the human psychology works is how you create character. You're inevitably going to learn if it's a good therapist, and don't get me wrong, there are a lot of bad therapists. I interviewed 6 before I got a proper one, and I've been working with her for 10 years. I'm so less crazy and so much more vulnerable since I've been working, but that was work. I didn't come to her and be like, can you really fix me? I need a black lady with some dreadlocks that's really brilliant, that has a husband and a child, and it's really balanced. I wanted somebody who had what I did not have to be my mentor in this journey. And she came up with a very wonderful analogy in talking about my childhood. You know, my parents are very, you know, none of them are educated. They're wise people. And my mother wasn't good with money. And then when the ATM cards and all that stuff came out, my mother was like overwhelmed. Because, you know, West Indians and Gullah people, you like, we got a susu at the corner. You put it in your backyard, or you put it in a jar in the closet, and you have to raise your gun. Like, she's like, oh, somebody holding my money and navigating this in a white people's bank? Oh my God. And my therapist was like, so your mom didn't know how to do that. Did not make her not wise. She just had to send you to the bank to learn how to do the thing and get the code. That's something she didn't know. But she taught you how to make some great pigeon peas and rice, and she taught you how to change a diaper, and she taught you how to clean a tub with bleach and a toothbrush. She taught you lots of things. She didn't know how to do that. But the gift she gave you is that they got you to this school so you could have access to ways to learn better and to learn more. That's all therapy is. And I tell you what, if you don't get in a room and learn what your parents didn't know, you will become your parents. There is no way about it. The child of alcoholics becomes an alcoholic, or they marry an alcoholic. No matter how many times you say it's not going to happen, you do. And it means that you are an unexamined human being. If your father could not show love, guess what? You will not know how to show love. No matter how many books you read and how many seminars you go to at the Landmark, you need to get in a room with somebody so they can unmantle all of those coping mechanisms and point out to you the places where you are blindsiding yourself. Because you are carrying 400 years of slavery. You are carrying women standing on the deck with tears rolling down their face, knowing they are walking to the edge of the landing of the ship and they're going to jump in rather than die a slave. As my great-grandmother said, I don't cry. We cried enough tears on the deck of that ship so that when we jumped in the water, we became the water. So I don't cry. How might I know how to live this life without crying? But that's what I thought, that you don't cry. How might you go through life not crying? But that's what she knew. And I'm not mad at her. I'm not mad at her at all. But I needed to learn how to cry. I wasn't allowed to cry at her funeral. Nobody cries at her funeral. Her daughter didn't cry at her funeral. And she said that, we don't cry. We don't cry. We ran off into them swamps, so we don't cry. And your cousin so-and-so and your granddaddy, he got hung. So we be crying all the time. We ain't trying to cry. We didn't cry when he got hung. We got a gun. And they both carry guns. I was like, that's great. Y'all clean somebody's floors to send me to Vassar. I don't have to carry a gun. I can be vulnerable. I can get somebody who might take care of me even. That's unimagined. If you don't cry, right? If all you do is suffer and you're stony-faced, that's a very limited way to live, given these people have done so much so you can have more. And that was the key to me with a really good therapist, was that I get to learn some skills that are not inherited. And our people are still using skills that have to do with surviving as a slave. Any day my child could be sold away. So what I have to do is be stony-faced with my child and teach them to be strong. And everything is going to be hard, and everything's going to be a pain in the ass, and nobody's going to like you, and white people are always going to give you a hard time. That is generally the set of coping mechanisms that we as a people have devised. In conversation with my Jewish friends, they have similar ones. The Holocaust could happen at any fucking time, so be on alert. That is a lot. Did you see that movie? That was anti-Semitism. Call your friend, call so-and-so, we're pulling out of that company, check your stocks. Okay, it's a way to live. You know, Sherry and I were talking about this last night. She's like, why do we work so well together? She was like, because we come from a people who are like, everybody's out to get us. We want to have good sex. We want to have a lot of money. We want to have a nice house. We want to eat at the best restaurants. And we want to complain about the man. I was like, that's us. She's like, Jewish people, black people, talk the same. I was like, oh yeah. I was like, that's why she's like, that's why when a Jewish boy meets you, he goes, it's my mom. And I'm like, yeah, because that's wrong. And get back over here and fix my plate. I didn't order this. And you know how much this costs? And I was like, oh my God, yeah. That's a set of mechanisms that were handed down to us because our people went through horrific shit. You know what? They went through that so we don't have to. They went through that so Barack Obama and Michelle could take a tour of the slave landing and go into mock slave houses and go, this is where our people was. They went through that. So that 400 years later, the people who was cleaning the White House is living in the White House. We get to do more. Get in the room and do more. And I have never met anyone who did not need to be in a room with a therapist. And the longer I'm friends with some people, I'm like, wow, Because you're friends with somebody for a long time, they tell you about the shit with their family. And I was like, wow, you're doing that right now. I was like, you need to she worked so you don't have to. So you could supersede. And not just supersede and make more money and have more success, but have a freer emotional life. The quality of your emotional life, what you expect from life, the expectation of good is entirely yours, but you do have to learn that skill. And in the process, you will learn how to create character with like the way the Brits do. They do a whole psychological study. When Earl Geister was at Yale Rep, at Yale University teaching the MFA program, it was all outside in. It was all, what is the character psychology? If you've ever, like an older Yalie, if you've ever been in a company with 2 or 3 of them in the class, or 2 or 3 of them in a play, they work outside in. They talk about the psychology of the character. Well, by Act 2, Scene 3, really she's reduced down to a person with the addictive qualities, and the addictive qualities manifest this way. They totally talk about character like a psychologist, completely, and then they create that behavior. It's how Anthony Hopkins created Hannibal Lecter. What is this? Interviewed a therapist. Several of them. Well, he'd also been in AA and lots of therapy. But part of their training is to look at it that way. And if you're ever in class with teachers like Bill Esper and Maggie, I was like, how can they reduce the psychology of this character down so quickly? It's part of the training. And instead of learning it 20 years later, how about you learn it now? That's the other piece of working with a therapist. When I'm talking about a character who's really broken, I have interviewed therapists. I was working on a play about, it was quirky, but it was slaves, and it was going to be an absurdist. Slaves talking about their psychology and how the day went today. And I was like, that would be good. That's genius. And I was like, so I interviewed some therapists I knew. I had a friend that was at Columbia getting her PhD, and I was like, so, what would be the psychology of a slave? What kinds of things would they be worried and concerned about? And it was very interesting, the things that she talked to me about. She was like a lot of obsessive behavior. She's like a lot of denial covered with extreme happiness. A lot of reclusivity. Like these characters, there would be people who just never engaged in any kind of interaction with other human beings. There would be silent people walking around the plantation. She's like, that would be standard part of it. I was like, really? She was like, yeah. And then there would be people who would be extremely happy all the time. They would spin every situation into a good one. That would be the psychology of that behavior. I was like, what might that look like? She was like, it would be totally rational. They would have like, well, today, Master's boots look like so-and-so, and he was not wearing that. And I cleaned them, and he was so pleased. I felt so good the whole day. And I was like, seriously? She was like, how might you get through that? How might you live and die a slave otherwise? I was like, wow, okay. It was extremely illuminating. And it allowed me, as I started writing about slaves, to have such a deep respect and compassion, and just be really emotional in thinking about what these people had to endure, and to just love them. Like, it made them real, it made them really human to me. And I was like, wow. Like, the most important part of your day might be cleaning this one section of the floor, and you've been trying to get them stains up off that wood for 20 years, and today it came clean. That might be, and I was like, whoa. That might be the height of your life, because you lived and died a slave, and you knew you were going to live and die a slave. That really changed. Working with a therapist really changed the nature of my work, really made me extremely frustrated with the roles I was being offered. Because I was like, this is not true. This is a type that we've been handed over and over and over again, and it's surfacey, but it's not true. And I was like, I need truth. And when you're playing somebody that is true and not a character, and now that I'm writing, I've met lots of writers, and most writers deal with the plot, and they're writing somebody imaginary. I can't imagine writing anybody imaginary. I always write somebody I know. So that when you're doing writing that's like that, when you're acting with writing like that, it sounds like real people talking. It doesn't sound like a script. And notice when you're doing plays, or you're watching plays, when it sounds like a script, and when it sounds like, oh, this real, like it sounds like a documentary. Because the psychology of a person is in their language. right? If you watch good documentary theater, I think of The Exonerated, which I did for many years with my business partner and good friend Jessica Blank, is that they had hundreds of actors do those roles. Every single person sounded exactly like Sonny Jacobs. Every single person sounded exactly like Carrie. And I had met the real people because the psychology of who they were was in the language. And you had these two playwrights who were like, I hear who they are. I hear that before every adjective, they take a breath and they're pulling it together. That's who Sunny is. She pulls it together. It's in the writing. It's magnificent when you watch. Mary J. Blige did the role, and then Lynn Redgrave did the role, and I was like, oh my God, it's the same person. It's in the, and everything's fine. And then I meditated, right? Because the sun was going to come up and there was going to be a cherry tree very towards me. It was gorgeous. That kind of writing makes you go, oh. Some writing gets at you because the given circumstances is so horrible, right? I talk about all the Africans being raped on stage across America. It's a downer. But we needed to hear about it because it's America's fault. In many cases, the genocide happened, right? So we're less interested in the writing of the language and more in the given circumstances and the stakes being there for us. That's one way to get at psychology, because then really you're exploring the psychology of a society that allowed this to happen and the forces of society outside that also allowed it to happen. So the excuse making that happened to survive, right? But when you watch something that is the language where the stakes are not life or death like that, and you hear the psychology of a person, your job as the actor is to be able to capture the truth of that, right? And it is in stepping completely into that person. And if you move from the center of your emotional range, you always will. There'll be no problem. You won't be sitting there learning lines thinking about, how do I say this line? You won't, because you emotionally understand them. And you will have done your fantasy work based on your center of range. So that exercise is a tough one. Sometimes we go through 30 or 40 movies. Sometimes we get it in an hour. Sometimes it takes me 2 or 3 hours with a person to get it. But once we get those 3 or 4 phrases, and they look like a breakdown, right? I play the intellectual who uses her brains to cover up her feelings. I play the Diana Ochun huntress, the protector of women and children who becomes a ferocious, ravening beast ready to go to war anytime I see a child or a woman abused. That's a breakdown. That's something you can sit across from your agent and go, this is who I play. And so you need to stop looking at the race of the characters and just submit me for things if their emotional core lives like that. Because maybe for that the rest of my life. And then I have to think about, so what might that look like in what I walk into the room with? So that means that straight-haired wig, maybe, but not so much. Maybe not so much. A lot of sort of wild hair fits in that emotional makeup. A lack of hair fits in that emotional makeup because the emotional character that I've just created doesn't have time to be sitting up in no salon every week doing no fucking hair. That's not who she is. And that is not what she leads with, right? That may come on the back end, but she does not exist for that. She has too many, she's saving the world, right? She's using her brains like a sword to cut through a lot of bullshit to get shit done. A person who is like that looks a certain way when they walk in the room. They come in the room a certain way. They don't lead with their sexuality. It may obviously so clearly be there. They're less worried about being skinny. They're less worried about being perfectly coiffed. They want the clothes simple as possible, and they want things that look like pieces of armor, like a big chunky ring, like a big earring, like a shaved head. She don't have time for none of that. She has time for adornment that is like the warrior that she is, because that's what she leads with. And that, you know, on the back end may turn out to be really sexy, as it is. And you know, she's worried. She's like, what the fuck are you looking at? You know, I always think of, oh, I can't think of her name now, the Ethiopian queen. It'll come to me. There's a queen of Ethiopia, her and her husband ruled. And when he got sick and the Italians were coming to invade, she went to war and they needed the women to fight. And no. Oh my God, I played her. It'll come to me in a minute. She went to war with her breast bared because she knew it would distract the men. And she required that all of the women who, you know, they were running out of men. They'd been at war with the Italians forever. And she said, okay, you got to bare your breasts. Like married royal women were like, I mean, I bear my breasts at home when we're having a party because it's honor. These are savages. We're killing them. She's like, yes, but it means something different to them, and they will stop them. They will pause. And she was right, and they did. And a lot of them lost their breasts in battle. They were cut. And she lost one of her breasts, and she still continued to go war on a horse, breast bared, one on, one gone. I was like, I got her. And it was my movement teacher who was like, you understand her. I was like, he was like, she had the big, and there are pictures of her. She had the big earrings. She had her hair in braids piled on top of her head, like her crown, so people would know who she was. She had some furs, and she was on her horse, bareback, and her breasts were bared. And I was like, she's extra. Like, she's extra. And he was like, you understand that? And I was like, right? That's where your emotional cords are. And it's important to know what the center of that range is. And you're not going to know. I mean, I know because I spent 3 years in a graduate program exploring literature and books, and then sort of looking at the roles that I was always attracted to. Because I never let my agents decide about themselves what I was going to be going in for. Ooh, child, please. I instructed them. This is what I play. And this is how it's manifest in the TV shows that are operating right now. Right? I would point out particular roles in particular shows that it might not have occurred to them to cast me in. Right? I was like, I'm the press secretary in West Wing. And they were like, but you're young and like vibrant and cute. And I was like, I'm the press secretary in West Wing. She's always surprised when somebody's sexually attracted to her. Because meanwhile, she is fighting the fine fight and she is mission oriented for humanity. And they were like, oh. And you teach them how to submit you. But you have to be very clear. And with business people in the business, you have to be able to reduce what it is that you do into very simple sentences. If it gets too complicated, they're like, I don't know what that means. You need to be able to say to them, I'm sort of Kate Blanchett means Whoopi Goldberg, but in this film, and this film, and this film, and this is why. And they go, oh. Then they can start submitting you looking at the given circumstances. I have a manager and an agent, and I have a new young agent that's working with me who actually reads all the scripts. It's very rare to get your agent who actually read the scripts. They usually just read the breakdown. There's so much more you learn from reading the script. And my manager reads every script. And so she, after talking to me about this, and then seeing my work, when you sign with somebody, they need to see your work. You do not need to sign with somebody who's not seen your work. If you have to get all of the agents in a room and do 6 monologues from them, they must see your work. They have no idea how to sell you. And today, in this current market, it is not enough to submit. You need to be submitted, and then you need 3 or 4 phone calls to happen to get you in that room. Trust. So they must feel like they are on a horse going to war for you. And they're only going to feel that way if they've seen your work. And you have every right to demand that. Every right. And if they can't get to a show, you need to schedule a time to go in the office and do some work for them. And it's not just the reel. They need to see you live. Otherwise, all of this emotional stuff that I'm talking about and really getting a whole picture of you and thinking outside the box about how to submit you and how to fight for you, which my manager actually taught my agents. She was like, did you see her in such and such? Did you see how she handled the language? Okay, she can do this. Right? And you need your agent to be able to speak that specifically about you because it is a beast getting into shit now. All of it's on offer. It truly, truly is. It's all on offer. Ingenue got more offers than she could take. I was like, Ingenue, you not gonna take that? Girl, I might have a shot. Right? It's just, so you really need somebody who understands that and is fighting for you. That's what the Headshot Center of Range exercise does. Is that clear how that sort of structures itself? The other end of that is the physical. It really helps you if there's somebody out here right now that looks like you. It really, really, really does. I mean, I always use the example of Whoopi Goldberg as opposed to some of the stand-up comedians. I mean, there's some stand-ups that I feel akin to, but people are just not going to read. Like, I love Monique's stand-up. I love all that cussing and all the raunchy sex stuff because she's not just making the blowjob jokes for the blowjob jokes. She is talking about she loves her man and she did anal sex, but truly, the first time it did feel like her eyebrows were burning off of the flame. And she said, and then when the flame got to here, I was like, oh. She's not just being vulgar. You know she went through that. And that's what makes it funny. There's like a lot of truth behind her stand-up. It's not just, which everybody's sort of doing, the black guy way. a storyteller who is sourcing the truth of their life, that's an interesting kind of take. It's you know, it's a difference between Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy early on was storyteller oriented, and then he got into a lot of physical comedy, which we're so glad he did because he's a brilliant physical comedian, like brilliant. But Richard was always the story and the truth of my life. This is so painful, or this is so fucked up that I better make a story out of it so you can experience the level of fucked upness and understand why I smoked the pipe and burnt my ass up, because this was so fucked up, I had to. You know, when I think of him telling, you know, in JoJo Dancer, when I think of him telling the story about, you know, he didn't know he grew up in a hoe house, and the one prostitute calling him in the room, asking him if he liked M&Ms. And he said, I love M&Ms. She said, I know, and she put M&Ms in it. And she said, go get them M&Ms. And he had to go get them M&Ms. He's like, I didn't know that that's what I was supposed to be doing. He's like, now I know that's a good thing. But at the time, I didn't know it was a good thing. He's like, and I was musing over that when I lit that pipe and burned my ass up. And you're like, you laugh, but you're like, wow. What happened to him was so fucked up that this totally makes sense where he is now, right? So when you look at people that are like you, look at that sensibility. I was able to, you know, my agents couldn't see Whoopi Goldberg. And I was like, But that story about the addict who ends up in the Anne Frank house, that the pathos of this person who is so fucking high, that's how they get through life, and the first time they let themselves feel something is in that room by accident, I understand that. And if you see my solo work, it feels like that. I'm not mimicking, I'm telling you a story about something that was my aha moment, fully immersed in the character, and then they go, oh, okay, you transform, right? But your agents can't just think about what you do in intellectual terms. They won't fight for you. They really, really, I've learned that with my first agent, Tony Clower, who was really amazing. And when I partied with him, it was very painful. But, you know, people at the public saying, oh my God, do you know how he fought for you? Do you know he came to a reading of my play to be like, you don't understand what you're doing. Her soul is right for this. I was like, no. They were like, he loves you. Like everywhere I went, directors would tell me things that he said. That doesn't happen from somebody who you have a conversation with saying, well, I'm really transformative. That happens when you have an agent that you invite to something, you share your work with them, and then you sit down for a good hour over dinner and you talk about who you are. That's how that happens. The same thing with your manager. You want representation that is like that. But until you are able to articulate that, you cannot get representation like that. You can also not source out people and know that that's who they are until you're able to talk about your work in those terms. And general terms never help. And meeting an agent or an actor, an agent or a manager who is not smart enough to articulate terms like that doesn't help you either. There are lots of well-meaning people. I was signed with someone who was well-meaning. They were not thinkers like that. It wasn't in their, that wasn't in their wheelhouse. So they couldn't fight for me. And I noticed I got sent in for stupid stuff all the time. That I was like, you know, let some comedian do this. They're not gonna go with me. They can get a real comedian. So that's center of your range and being able to articulate that, coupled with who do I physically look like? So if you say to them, I mean, there is nobody that I super physically look like, which becomes a little problematic. You can get someone whose essence is similar to yours, right? And I feel that I bring that kind of forthrightness that Whoopi does when I walk in the room. Not having somebody that I physically look like is really a disadvantage in the business. Kim Fields doesn't work. Kim Fields worked as a child, and then she directs and stuff. I mean, we were actually with the same agents for a while. We kind of go up for the same thing, but now she's got the blonde dreadlocks. She's like this Cassandra Wilson thing. It's really beautiful. And she directs, and she feels like the art curator. But again, she's not working a ton like I'm not working a ton in other people's projects because they don't know what to do with smart, arty-looking bohemian black women. They don't. There hasn't been somebody that looks like that that's won an Oscar or been in a bunch of interesting films. So it's going to be on us to make those films. It's pretty much. We got a little bit of breakthrough with Daughters of the Dust, but then that wasn't commercial. So, but you have to find somebody. If you don't you don't have to look exactly like them, but you need to be able to say your emotional chords. And I always love to say, like I told you that scene in Waiting to Exhale, that tells someone a lot about how you're built emotionally, especially if you come to life. This is how I know when I'm doing the center of range exercise. If you're not coming to a full, rich emotional life, then that's not it. You're not getting at what it is about that moves you. Because when you talk about something that moves you, it will live in you, no matter what. And that's what needs to happen when you're doing that for the agent. This is where I move. This is where I breathe. And they will feel it in your telling of the story. That coupled with someone that you look like. So it doesn't have to be identical, but I can look around this room and there's people that look like all of y'all. So you're good. There are people who feel like you, right? And that means too that you also have to make it your fucking business to be watching TV and film. Independent, Blockbuster, Showtime, cable, and look at what actors of color and even white actors, the Brits, are doing. Because their work is far more interesting, as is the writing. There are actors there that you can be like, like I told you, Adrian Lester. You guys don't look alike. Energetically, you feel very similar. You feel very similar. Works all the time. And they found a niche for him. If you watch Primary Colors, he's like the campaign manager for the Liberal president's campaign. We'd not seen a black guy in that role before. It's totally a Barack Obama type. Joe Morton's been playing that type for years, but there was no work, like leading roles for him. Now there are. That's a type, you can talk that way. And there are people that look like David Olu. Why am I not going to pronounce his name right? Do you know what I'm talking about? David Oyuwalu. He's fantastic. He's fantastic. He's like Britain's Jeffrey Wright. He transforms in everything and brilliant and fluid, right? In First Lady's Detective Agency, he is a flamboyant, swishy character. I didn't even recognize him, but always leading with really smart, whip-smart, crackling wit, and always 4 steps ahead of everybody else in the room, right? It's your business. And when I talk to young black actors, they don't know nobody. And I was like, that's dumb. You need to be, and you need to be watching good shit. Zainab's my dear friend. She knows. She's like, did you see so-and-so? And did you see so-and-so? I was like, I do not go see shit that's going to make me mad. I was like, this is how I continue to live in the business. And generally, I say, no, I didn't see that. And I'll be polite and I'll be like, because there's a role in that for me. And I don't want to see another production of it because I'm going to play that one day. When the reality is, sometimes I'll be like, they can't act. And who should really be in that role is such and such and such and such. But that would be rude for me to say. So it is best for me just not to go see it and read it. It's why I like being a writer and a producer, because I get to say, you know what? I have always wanted to see Hubert Pont de Jour play a French character from the 40s who's this intellectual. Why have I never seen that? I know he can do that. And lo and behold, I got to write a play and cast him as that. And he was amazing. He was amazing. Because I'm an artist, I know what people can do, and I saw him do it. And he has never played that anywhere else, ever. Servants, butlers, African guy talking about politics. I was like, you're missing the juiciest part of him. That's why I like making work. You should know about actors that way. Then I cast my first reading. The casting director was like, well, how do you know about so-and-so? And how do you know? And I was like, I'm an artist and a really good actor. I've watched them. I watch shows. If I see somebody who's really wonderful, I Google them and I watch everything they've done. So that as a writer or a director, I can sort of track them down at Sundance and be like, you need to do my next script. But also because it teaches me a lot about acting. It teaches me who's out there, whose sensibility is like mine, who I need to be then discussing with my manager and my agent. You know, so-and-so played this. I could play that opposite him. And they're like, oh, I never really thought of that. Or Sophie Okonedo should be playing this. Energetically, I actually do play some of her quirky early British stuff. You need to be watching stuff. I have a friend He's like, I don't watch independent film. It's dry. I was like, you're an idiot. Because you're a biracial man. There is a ton of shit in independent film for you. You're an intellectual biracial man who can also play gay, totally believably. What do you mean you don't want? It's dry. You would be playing leads instead of the white boy sidekick in all these dumb TV shows. And he's like, oh. And then I went through a list of actors. He was like, how do you know them? I was like, because I don't watch bad shit.